back to the Rupert and Pinchy Show. I'm Isaiah, and that's George. And we also have code names, Rupert and Pinchy, and you are going to have to guess who's who. And if you haven't watched any of our videos before, we appreciate your time. We welcome you to subscribe, and also leave a thumbs up if you like the video. And so, yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. And good morning, George.
Good morning, Pinchy.
Oh, no, you gave it away.
Cat's out of the bag. Cat's out of the bag.
You know, the code names are code names for a reason. You're not supposed to say the code names.
Mm-hmm.
I know. I'm literally reversing what a code name is, by the way.
Well, now we're going to have to get a new cover from the CIA and the NSA, because those are the ones that they said, hey, you can use these, but don't let anyone know who they are or who you are or whatever, because these are going to be what you use when you travel the world seeking to destroy evil. So, sorry, Pinchy.
We are not superheroes. I mean, we could try, but I can't really do much. I guess I could just run over their toes. And what would you do? You would just look at them and they'd be like, ah!
No, I would just talk their heads off until finally they say, please stop, okay, we'll do whatever you say. The weapons are in the cave in Glapakistan, just off of First Street, you know? Okay. So, anyway.
That's perfect plan. Now I actually want to do that. We should do a skit.
What, superhero? Yeah.
The fight crime fighting duo. Wheelchair Man? No, I don't know.
Well, yeah, Wheelchair Man might be good.
Wheels.
You know, so it's kind of like now all these skits and parodies have already been done in different ways. So the one with me on my Python, when the guy won't shut up and he's talking and the person's listening and finally getting so angry with him, and then he shoots him, so you shut up. And then for you, it's like on Saturday Night Live, there was a skit called the attorney caveman, the attorney, defense attorney caveman, because he would always appeal to, well, what do I know? I'm just a caveman, and it was actually really pretty funny, and so that's how you could use like your wheelchair. It's like, well, what do I know? I'm just a simple kid in a wheelchair, and no, I don't have any weapons, or I'm not dangerous. So
well, thanks for the compliment. That none of my jokes are original.
Well,
or yours.
I said
it's also self-deprecation.
No, mine. Yeah. It's there's nothing new under the sun, and in a sense, so.
Yeah, so
yeah, we could do that and make loads of money.
What?
Besides the Science Foundation that we are going to be forming when when Elon Musk donates to our he's going to donate to the I believe the party is it in Italy or in France, where he's going to donate possibly a lot of money for so that the conservative side will win instead of the progressive. Or at least give them an opportunity to get their message out. So I'm not thinking that we need 100 million. I'm thinking we could do with a little less.
I was thinking more.
Oh, well, you're the one. You're the big thinker. You're the one that they
call me Thinks.
Yeah, thanks. Well, if you don't aim high, then you're always shooting low.
Yep.
Right? So,
that's a perfect segue into our topic. Not really, in any way, shape, or form.
Go ahead.
No, I'm. That's the segue. Is
for me?
That's the segue. You're saying that we're segueing. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because that's what a segue is. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So, Rupert and I were just briefly talking about this, and we were going to do a 10-minute. Well, I talked to myself. Pinchy and I'm trying to keep myself hidden from, anyway.
Well, you already gave it away, so it doesn't help.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Pinchy and I were talking about this subject, and we are going to do a 10-minute on it, but it was a little bit maybe longer perhaps than a 10-minute, or it definitely had the potential to, if depending upon where you go on it. But I was just bringing up how interesting it is to me that in the garden, when Adam and Eve are being tempted, God is fully aware that they're being tempted, and he doesn't step in to stop them in their poor choice. And then also then I was thinking in the situation with Cain, which is very similar, where Cain is upset because his offering to God was not accepted and Abel's was, and God comes and tells him, "Hey, relax. If you do what's well and right, your offering will be accepted as well." And he said, and then God warns him in a similar way that he warned Adam and Eve that if they eat of the fruit, he warns them that, hey, sin is crouched at the door and its desires for you. You must be master over it, you know. And then Cain wanders on, and he a little later asks his brother Abel to go to the field with him, and then he slays his brother, and certainly God knew what the multiple possibilities that he knew ultimately what Cain would do, but he also knew Cain could either not kill him, he could hurt him, he could hide him and bury him in a ditch like Joseph, or he could kill him, you know. But he didn't. Regardless, he didn't stop him, and it's not from lack of power and of God. And so and then so I don't know what you that's just really interesting to think about, because there's a lot of things, questions that follow from that could either tell us a little bit about the way God deals with man. It tells us a little bit about what maybe man is, and what he's equipped for, and it tells us a little bit about the relationship between God and man. I mean, the numbers of things that you could go into, and then there would be logical questions that would follow from that. Well, if he didn't step in, then why this, or this, or this, or this, or this? And all those questions are obviously good questions. And sometimes we can have an answer for them, and sometimes they're a little bit of mystery to us. But whether we feel we have an answer to those, or whether we feel there's a mystery to it, even when we recognize that something is a mystery and we don't quite understand it, that in itself brings us understanding. So that's what we were talking about this morning, and so
yeah, well, and the thing is, we can't answer every little thing about why God allows what, but we can give reasons, and I mean, that's what we see in Christian history is theodicies are made for a reason. A theodicy is basically an explanation of evil, or problem of pain, either of those. One being physical evil and the other being moral evil, which do have some similarities, but I really think that there might be more of a distinction than people realize. But anyway, so it's not really possible to answer every possible reason why God may allow this or allow that. But it is a reasonable question to ask, I think, because it can help us to learn more, like you said. And so I don't know if it would be something that you would want me to do, to maybe give possible explanations, but I'm not entirely sure what you're aiming towards. And so I'm willing to do that part, but I am wondering, because you seem to indicate that that's not the point. But I do have thoughts about that.
Well, let me add to, you mentioned that the problem of pain, which is interesting because even before the fall, at the fall when Eve is sentenced for her sin, he says, "I'll greatly multiply the pain of childbirth for you," which kind of indicates that there was going to be pain before. If they had never fallen, it kind of indicates there was going to be some kind of pain in childbirth.
Right, because
Because
it's
he said,
increased.
yeah, it's increased. And so, and that's not hard to understand when you think of a size of a baby and the birth canal.
Yeah.
And granted, so, and, but that's another
Well,
subject.
something like that I just thought of is the fact that it also says that to the man that the ground is now cursed because of you, and that thorns and thistles will grow from the ground, and it will not. I'm not sure what the entire wording is, but it also doesn't indicate that there wouldn't be any pain on his end in the first place. Because working at all does provide make somebody tired. So that's also interesting because it doesn't say, well, now you'll get more exhausted, which maybe that is part of it, but it's saying that the ground will become more difficult to deal with, which is interesting.
Yeah. So he's a gardener, like Mr. Miyagi in in the Karate Kid. He's a gardener where he's just like, tending a really pleasant garden that has no weeds or dangerous insects and then he goes to becoming a tiller of the ground and toiling in fields that have weeds, have wild animals, have that he has to deal with. Yeah, you're right. It's okay. It was going to be a lot easier in the garden, but and that kind of shows us that God, or suggests that God created man to enjoy a certain amount of work,
Mm-hmm.
a certain amount of achievement.
Right. Yeah. This is another off-topic thing, but what's interesting is Adam was a gardener and a shepherd, right? Because he's over the animals. And David was a shepherd, and Jesus is the great shepherd, right? There's a typology there. That's interesting.
Well, not only is Jesus the great shepherd, but he's the bread of life, which is what comes
Food.
from the ground.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he's both again. And so, when I first there's a typology there with Seth and Cain. The fact that Seth was a shepherd and Cain was focused on being a tiller of the ground.
Do you mean Cain and Abel?
What did I say, Seth?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Cain and Abel. I'm sorry. Abel was a shepherd, and Cain was a tiller of the ground, and so Abel is kind of a typology of Jesus, who was also a shepherd, and he was killed by the devil's offspring, in a sense. Both Abel was and Jesus.
Oh,
and so
what's also interesting is, remember where Abel's blood speaks from the ground, or whatever it is, like, and Jesus's blood is what speaks for us
to the ground.
Yeah. Yep. Very interesting. And there's also that typology brought up in Hebrews, if I remember correctly, talking about Jesus's blood being greater than Abel's or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's a more righteous testimony. Just like, Solomon was great, but something greater than Solomon is here. Moses was great, but something greater than Moses is here. It's that kind of thing. Yeah. So in that, there used to be a real emphasis that there was something really great about shepherds, and really that's not the message in Genesis between shepherds and tillers of the ground.
Right. It's
The,
not.
no, because the Cain's sacrifice wasn't received because it didn't have animals with it. You know, it was his attitude, so
Well, and the more close typological connection would be Jesus as, I mean, I think I could say this, Jesus as the great overseer or bishop. Kind of, that's what the term bishop means, right? Is overseer. Very interesting because, it's like as Jesus is a shepherd, he keeps watch over our souls, which is what bishop means. And
mhm.
that when we look at the typological connection is, yeah, Abel was literally a shepherd, right? And was Jesus literally a shepherd? Not really. But he is a shepherd in this way that he keeps watch over the flock of God. And it's just very interesting. It's not an actual, like he's not actually a shepherd, but he is like a shepherd in this way. And that's pointing to him as the great shepherd.
Yeah, it's not a 1-to-1 correlation.
Right.
In fact, he's neither a shepherd nor a tiller of the ground. He's a carpenter. so 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 then you go in the garden. You go like, okay, so with Cain and Abel, when you think of there's a lot there. Just the fact that they're offering sacrifice to God. Where do we see God instructing them to do that? That's another question, another sidelight, but there's some really good information there to be gleaned. But when you think of bringing a sacrifice, there's two purposes in it, two basic purposes, and one is to offer fidelity and submission and love to God. And the second part of that sacrifice is to seek favor. You're looking for favor from God. That's why you're sacrificing. But Abel brought a sacrifice that he was looking to honor God and recognize that everything that he has comes from God, and then also he was seeking God's favor. And so those would have been the same two reasons why Cain brought a sacrifice. And so I think the major difference I would suggest, is how they viewed God's favor. And so with Seth, he was asking for God's favor. Whether he would give it or not, he was just seeking God's favor. Whereas
Abel?
in Cain felt
You
like
mean
he was
Abel?
going to... No, Cain.
You
As in
said Seth.
Seth again? Oh, when Abel brought the sacrifice to him, he was offering, his first fruits to God, realizing that everything that he has comes from God, and offering him worship, and he was seeking God's favor. And then when Cain brought it, Cain would have the same two reasons to sacrifice: to offer God, to recognize that God is the source of all good things, and to seek God's favor. And so I think where Cain made his mistake is that Cain looked at favor like he was putting God in debt to him. God now owed him favor.
Right, yeah. That's how
because I brought this sacrifice, now you owe me. Whereas Abel, and this I'm just suggesting, we don't see that in Scripture, but I'm using other scriptures and the content of Scripture to come to that conclusion, and that Cain or Abel was not, he didn't think God automatically owed him, but he was hoping for God's favor. And he had hope in God's favor because God showed himself to be a giver. He created the whole universe. So why wouldn't you hope? And if God decided not to give you favor or something that you were seeking, or he didn't give it the way you thought, or he didn't give it right away, or whatever, Abel had trust that God knew best.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Cain came there like a businessman.
Right.
Then, okay, I'm going to do this, and then this is owed to me.
Well,
because it's
sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh,
No, go ahead.
Just a couple things that I was thinking that are interesting to note is the fact that when Jesus sets up I guess technically you could say Jesus, but I mean just God. He sets up the Mosaic covenant, and in that covenant, one of the sacrifices that they give is the fruit of the ground, and so nowhere is the fruit not an acceptable sacrifice.
Right.
So the idea that God would just not accept what Cain is giving because it's fruit is like, no, fruit is also something that God even commands to be sacrificed to him. And so I don't think that's the issue.
Right.
And then you ask the question, why does God say to him, well, if you do well, will you not be rewarded? Well, did he not do well in giving the sacrifice? And so that's why you kind of have to read in between the lines in a sense, where it's like, okay, if the action that he did isn't itself bad, but God says that if you do well, will you not be rewarded? Obviously, he's not doing well. There's something, somewhat of a heart issue that Cain seems to be having here. And it's not about the sacrifice and the action itself, but it's about faith. Faith is accompanied by action, but action by itself doesn't mean that you have faith, right? Just because you act in a certain way doesn't mean that you necessarily have faith. And so it may look on appearance to be the same thing, because again, God is pleased with animal sacrifice and sacrifice from the ground. And so I don't think that that's what the contrast is that Cain had a lesser sacrifice. I think it's more about the fact that Cain is not approaching God with faith, but Abel is. And that's why Abel can be listed in, Abel is one that had faith. Mm-hmm. And I believe there's scripture that says that. I don't remember exactly where it is. But that seems to be what probably the difference is. And that's the part that makes sense, at least to me. Because, let me go back to the Mosaic Covenant for a second. There's two parts of the Mosaic Covenant that are talked about by Moses. One isn't necessarily built into, it kind of is built into it, but things that are indicated by Moses in Deuteronomy. The first thing is, obviously, the law itself, the listing of commandments. But then also Moses reiterates over and over again, if you do not circumcise your heart or seek him in all things and obey him fully and have a faith, basically, that unless you have that, you will not last very long, basically. And so you have both. You have, hey, I'm telling you these commandments to do, and it's not only the commandments, it's also the fact that you need to have faith in God. And that's why the Shema starts with, the Lord your God is one, I think. I don't know if I'm drawing all those connections properly, but I think that that's the two parts of the Mosaic Law, and that's the two parts of what's going on with Cain and Abel. Is one has works without faith, one has faith and works, and that they're not separable. And I just thought that it does make sense that it would be a heart issue with Cain, because nothing else fully fleshes out what the reasoning in the passages. And so, yeah, that's a couple of thoughts that I had on that I thought were interesting.
Well, I think that that idea, I think you could draw it like you did. And I would say that you could say it that way, and I think it would be true. But I also would say that it was the intention more than the fact of lack of faith. Unless you want to say intention is faith, and that's another idea that you could go to.
And that's what I meant.
Because I think if it's God is telling Cain that, listen, if you do well, you'll be accepted, and so there was an opportunity. It was just like to me. It was just like the situation with Cain. So much mirrors the situation with Adam and Eve. So when Adam and Eve are getting tested, I'm going to strike that word. When they're getting tempted, although they're similar words, but it's not the same in this situation. When Satan is tempting them, Adam and Eve knew enough that they could have said, hey, wait a minute. Hey, Mr. Snake Oil Salesman, what you sounds really good, but something doesn't sound right about it. So we're going to go back to our leader and ask him to tell us again what, or ask him more questions. Why? But they didn't. But God is ever present to them. And so, and something so clearly pointed out by the Lord, it doesn't say that the Lord said, hey, over that tree, eat that tree first, eat that one second, eat that one third, eat that one fourth. No, he just said, don't eat that one. So they could have easily gone, hey, wait a minute, before we buy this really cool car, let's go talk to the bank. Or let's go look at our bank account. Let's go. So they had an opportunity, many opportunities, but to stop. Or Adam could have stopped Eve from even talking to the snake, since he had authority over all creatures. But they didn't. So here's Cain, and God himself is talking to him and says, hey, if you do what is right and just, you'll be accepted. Right then, Cain could have said, well, what did I do wrong? I did exactly the same thing that Abel did. And then God would be in dialogue with him. Well, Abel came because he loved me. And he was hoping for my favor, not as a equal, not trying to insinuate to me that I owed him, but that we had a relationship. And so if you want to bring a sacrifice, that's great. I don't care if it's half your grain storage. I don't care if it's 1/10 of your grain storage. I don't care if it's 1/100th of your grain storage. But if you bring it to me because you love me and you want to have a relationship with me, then you'll be accepted. So then Cain could have gone okay. And he could have walked back out to the field, gathered some more stuff up, brought in for an offering, and then maybe offered, and then God would say, almost, Cain. Almost. Let's have a little bit more talking. And he would draw Cain out. But Cain was not interested.
Right.
He was not interested. And, the truth of the proto-evangelium, where it says that the offspring of the serpent will be in enmity against the offspring of the woman. Here we have a perfect example of that happening. Cain had enmity against Abel. And also there's another place in scripture says that sadly it was simple envy. Well, and I say simple envy. Envy is very sickly. He just envied somebody else for doing what was right, rather than going okay, I can do that. And especially when God is right there saying, hey, if you do what's right, Cain could, what's a great follow-up question? What did I do what was wrong? What did I do that was wrong?
Right.
He didn't have that question. Why? Do you think he had that question in his mind? I think he already had an answer. He already knew it and he didn't care.
Well, he clearly doesn't care.
Or we don't, to assume too much is to assume too much, but he is eventually cast out, and it says he became a wanderer, and he resided in the land of, I think it was Nod. I can't remember the name, but the meaning of that town that he was sent to, or that he settled in, is called the land of wandering. So he wandered and never came to the knowledge of the truth, it seems. But anyway,
I have a question. What does proto-evangelium mean?
First gospel.
Okay. I'm just wondering, because every single time you say that, the first thing that comes to my mind is the proto-evangelium of James.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that, I don't know how many people associate it with that, but that's what I'm wondering. Something that's also cool about the Cain story is the fact that God still has mercy on him even after he kills his brother. And it's just like, from the beginning, Cain doesn't trust God and God's grace. Because he is, again, he's not, his heart isn't in it. And he is not approaching it based on his love for God, it seems. And so it's just interesting to see how even after he doesn't trust God's grace, God gives him grace anyway. Yeah.
Well, and that flows to our original question about why didn't God step in? And we call it that God showed him mercy. One way to look at that is this is man's kingdom. Yes, God created it, but this is man's kingdom, and he's not going to overstep. And so he tells, Cain says, it seems like when God cast Cain out, and Cain kind of says, this is too harsh of a punishment. I will forever be driven from your face. And then I can't remember what the second one is, that I'll be a wanderer or something. But the key when he says, I'll forever be driven from your face, that is tying into a little bit of what you said. It's like, why is that? It almost reminds me of the parable of the talents, when the guy who was given the one talent set, he goes into quite great detail of what the owner of the vineyard is like. You're this. You're demanding. You reap where you don't sow. You do, and he goes in. He's wrong on what he thinks of the master and the owner, but the master's like, "Oh, you think that is what I am? I'll go by what you think then." Whereas the master would have been very open to all that guy had to do is put the money in the bank instead of just bury it. But he went by on his own assumptions rather than thinking, maybe I have the understanding of the owner of this vineyard wrong. Because he seems very generous. He gave me a talent of gold, which is, what is it, worth 15 years of income for a normal laborer or something like that. And so going back to Cain has said, I'll forever be driven from your face. Okay. Where did God tell him that you'd be forever driven from your face, from my face? God didn't tell him that.
Right.
Cain decided that.
Well, and it relates to humility and pride. And Cain seems to be too proud to turn around. It's like, well, obviously, I'm going to be driven away from your sight. Instead of humbly coming before him and asking for forgiveness.
And I don't want to be driven from your side. I refuse to go.
Right.
Exactly. Kill me here because I would rather die than be away from your face. If this is where your face is, where I'm standing right now, then this is where I want to die.
And you know what's curious? They should have realized, hey, so I killed my brother. What should happen to me? Well, I probably should die. But God hasn't killed me. Instead, he spared my life, and he says that if anybody kills me, that God will what is that God
Sevenfold.
sevenfold on whoever kills him. It's like, that's interesting. So instead of me dying, God is preventing me from dying, which maybe that means that he's wanting me to repent, and he's giving me time to do so. I mean, like, why else would he be doing that? I'm just wondering. Like, I mean, I think he could have drew that connection there.
Oh yeah, or if you just like you said, humility of and then just recognizing that God is God. Nothing apart from him matters. So I don't want to go, but anyway, so that kind of is a slight indication of that, that Cain is making decisions for himself still at the very point of him being cast out, rather than just submitting.
Right.
It's a little bit like Judas, after he betrayed Christ. Was there anything that Jesus said during those 3 years of ministry that Judas heard that would indicate to Judas that Christ wouldn't be willing to forgive him? Or that God wouldn't be willing to forgive him? No.
Right.
But he made that decision rather than to seek it. I'll deal with it on my own.
Right. Well, and you see the contrast between him and Peter's response. Peter denies Christ 3 times. And then he's brought back by Christ and put in the leadership role. I mean, it's like he messed up, right? But he still was reconciled in the end. But Judas, who decided to take his own life in his own hands instead of letting God do what he would with him, or Jesus maybe even restoring him, possibly, it's like instead he just puts himself in a miserable position and doesn't just accept the failure and come back. And I think that there are many times where we see these two separate ways of responding to God's correction. You have Job, who does not sin with his lips. He does not turn away from God, but instead he, even if Job still needed to learn a little bit more, right? He still kept his integrity. And Peter was restored, and Abel was, and Cain, instead of fessing up, didn't fess up, and Judas didn't turn away from his sin. And so there are some contrasts that we can find. But something relating to the topic that we were talking about at the beginning is this question that I am curious what you think. I have my own response, but the question would be, so yeah, let's say that God allows Cain to act and on his own free will, okay? But why does Abel have to suffer? Why isn't Abel just taken away before Cain kills him? Why does Cain physically have to kill Abel? Couldn't he just make that decision? But God stopped him from being able to act upon it? Would be the question.
Well, and that's the same question I kind of asked. That's the question is like, okay, it wasn't so much that, it was both. Why, if God knew that, and I wasn't thinking of the concern for Cain, I was thinking of the concern for Abel. If God knew that Cain was going to do him, why didn't God tell Abel, hey, go hide yourself? Or why didn't God send an angel to keep Cain from being able to kill him? And so there's a lot of answers. They're all similar, but I would say because this is God created man's kingdom, and man is has his own free will, and because of free will, both of Abel's, even though Abel's was being stolen from him, the free will of another individual had the opportunity or the choice to take it, and so and that's why I think it's very, very similar to Adam and Eve's fall. You know, was Satan's brilliance so great that Adam and Eve should have fallen? No, not really. But why didn't God step in and protect Eve, who was just being deceived? And so the answer. Go ahead. Well, you can give your answer, so I know what. Maybe I answered it.
Well, that is the question, but you didn't quite answer it, because the thought or the maybe reformulated, it would be like, okay, so let's say that God wants to keep intact free will. Abel has free will, Cain has free will. Could God not stop Cain from being able to actually physically harm Abel while maintaining Cain's free will? Because Cain has already made up his mind. I'm going to go kill my brother. But why can't Abel just disappear? Like, why can't God just, like, take him, whisk him away right before he's killed by Cain? Because Cain's already made up his mind. And so, does that remove free will? Does that infringe on free will?
What?
God taking Abel away before he's physically harmed, when Cain's already made up his mind to kill him.
I don't think it eliminates free will, but I think it eliminates the kingdom of man. And so, whereas God created a kingdom that, yes, God is over all of creation. God is sovereign, right? He's creator. But he created not just men with free will, but the society of man with free will. Not that God is like, is it the deist that believes in a God, so-called God, but that God is somewhere else taking a nap and doesn't bother with? Yeah. So it's not that God is doing that, because we will see that God does at times enter into the kingdom of man and stop certain things that might seem a little similar to the scenario that we're talking about here. Well, why did he do it there and not here? Well, it's not the exact same situation, and that's farther down in the line of history, and there's other factors involved that would require more to go through it. And in this situation, Cain is a little bit like the serpent. We could say then, why didn't God just allow the serpent to make his decision to try to thwart man and God's kingdom, that he's God and man's kingdom that God is establishing through Adam and Eve? Why didn't he stop the serpent?
Right.
He didn't even have to protect Eve. Why didn't he just stop the serpent? And so, so that's the same question. And so,
well, the question still stands.
What is your answer? So, why do you think?
So in this case, I think there are differences between the serpent and Cain that are really important to pin down and might take hours to even complete. So I don't know if we can go into that. But when it comes to the Cain situation, this might relate to your answer. I'm not entirely sure what your answer means, and so I think this might mean what you're saying, but I'm not sure. There's two things. One, the natural world works a certain way. When you throw something up in the air, it comes back down. If you do such and such thing, then such and such things will happen. So there's natural laws that occur. Something that's similar, that's not the same as physical laws, is you kill somebody, they're dead. Or you feel this certain way and then you move your arm this certain way, then this person dies. So unless God just intervened with every single action that ever occurred, then it would almost be pointless to make any decisions whatsoever. And so I know that you said it doesn't remove free will, but it kind of does. Because it's like, if I try to kill somebody, they just disappear. There's no physical effect that tells anybody, hey, when this happens, then this occurs. Then if you stab somebody, they're dead. We live in a world where things happen, and if those things don't happen, then it's just like, what even is this world then? It's just like, things are just convention. It seems to break down the structure of how things work and how reality is structured.
Well, I think
so. That's the first part of the answer.
Well, I think you're right. Our answers are similar. I'll address. I think you're wrong that it destroys free will, or not. You didn't say destroy, but I agree with you. It's similar. It's similar to gravity. It's like this is the world God made. He made it so that it could flow based on those laws, and the laws of gravity. The part that's dissimilar is the laws of gravity don't have free will involved. Those were already established by God, so there's no will there. For a rock doesn't will to fall; it is destined to fall. Whereas Adam and Eve weren't destined to fall; they could have chosen to obey God. Just like Cain wasn't destined to kill his brother, but he could have not killed his brother. And so, to me, it seems it's like this a little bit. A husband is to be a certain way with his wife, and a wife is to be a certain way with her husband. We know this. We know what the proper way to be a husband is through a couple reasons. We know it through natural law. We know it through just common virtue ethics that are knowable by the intellect and reason of man. And we also know it by the scripture and how we can look at, how are husbands to be? They're to love their wives as Christ loved the church. So we know how husbands are to behave, and then we also know how wives are to behave. And so a man and woman get married, and there's a whole wide range of terrible marriage to really great marriage, and everywhere in between. And so all along the way, there's individuals, husbands and wives, making independent choices and decisions. And in some regards, they're not conforming perfectly to the law of God. Yet God does not step in all of those marriages and force the husband to be a better husband or force the wife to be a better wife. It doesn't mean that he doesn't extend influence through grace or through society or through, whatever. So so anyway,
right.
So I'm in agreement with you on this, that our answers are similar.
Well, yeah, well, I do want to expound a little bit. When I say it infringes on free will, what I mean is, if we don't have the structures of reality in place, then there is no such thing as meaningful action. Because, when you decide to eat something, you are deciding to do something in reality. I'm going to pick up that orange, and I'm going to eat it. God doesn't just make it appear in your stomach, or he doesn't just make it disappear because you made the wrong decision. Decisions are only possible because reality is structured in such a way that you can make meaningful action. And so if, Cain relies on the fact that, well, God will always intervene whenever an action occurs, then when he goes to kill Abel, he's not considering the fact that he's making a meaningful action in the world. And I don't think that I think that doesn't allow, if we don't have those structures of reality, it doesn't really allow for free will decisions to make any sense, if that makes sense, or be meaningful, because you could just think something, and that's as far as your free will decision goes, but it doesn't interact with reality. But we are physical beings who relate to the world in a certain way, and so we only have meaningful action because of the structures that are in place, because we have physical bodies, because there are rules that typically are continuous in the world. And, in this case, it's not a natural just law where it's like what goes up must come down. No, there are consequences to actions, and the only way that we can see those consequences is if those consequences actually exist. Abel's no longer around. So Cain, there's multiple significations of why Abel's body matters, where it's like, okay, this is a testimony against the Adam and Eve and Cain, that there is sin in this world now because of all of y'all's action, and that it's gotten this bad where Adam and Eve lose a son. So now they're sad because they lost a son, and it leaves an opportunity for them to realize the significance of their action. Cain also recognizes the significance of his action because he no longer has his brother around, and now he's also given a seal, like, hey, if other people kill you, then sevenfold on them, and before that, would Cain really know? This is what death is, if he didn't see Abel die. So, if he thinks about death, as in, I would be like Abel, then he can realize what is being told to him. And so, I think just, basically reality implodes if God doesn't allow for meaningful action in the world. And that's why I think that it kind of obstructs free will when there wouldn't be these rules, or God wouldn't act in this way.
Well, okay, so a correction on both our parts. It's not that Cain will be avenged sevenfold. That's actually Cain's son that does that. Cain. It just says he who kills Cain will be killed.
Well, hold on. No, it is sevenfold because Lamech says 77-fold.
Does he?
Yes.
Well, anyway, I want to be certain on that. I think it's
well, do you have the passage?
That might be. Yeah, that might be. It's in chapter 11.
Do you have your Bible?
Well, I can pull it up, but it's not important.
Well, it is because you're bringing a clarification, but that's fine.
Yeah. So, sometimes people think free will is like, if there wasn't consequences, if there wasn't reality, well,
physical effects.
If we're saying there isn't reality, then there's not reality. Okay, that's kind of what we're saying in a way. But if I'm on the top of a cliff and I'm like, okay, I know gravity exists. I know if I jump off this, I'm going to die. And so my free will is to either jump or not jump. My will does not change the fact that gravity exists. I can't go like, well, if I have, sometimes people will think, well, I don't have free will because I can't decide whatever I want to do. It's like, okay, you're confusing two realities. First of all, there's certain laws in place that you have to abide by. And the freedom comes whether or not you abide by them or not. And if you don't abide by them, there's consequences. And so if you jump off this cliff, you're going to die. Well, Jerry jumped off and he didn't die. He got lucky. He hit the side and he rolled down, and yeah, he's not dead, but he's got 40 multiple fractures and he's laid up in bed for, 3 years or whatever. And so yeah, there's certain things in place that even though this is man's kingdom in a sense, and I use that term with a small k, the kingdom was prepared and built by God, and so God is the one who sets the parameters.
Right. Well, and these parameters allow free will to happen in a certain way. Because free will doesn't dictate that you can will anything that even the impossible, things that are impossible. No, it's freedom to will among the possibilities that can occur. Right? It's like I can jump off a ledge and gravity will affect me, or I cannot jump off the ledge and gravity won't affect me in that way. And so I'm making a free will choice. Hey, I'm not going to do this. But free will choice is within logical possibilities or within the framework of reality and the laws of that God has set up. And so free will doesn't dictate that one action is better than another, but free will can choose among various possibilities, and there may be good effects or bad effects to making those actions that are not dictated by the wishes of the person that is acting, right? Maybe you don't wish to die when you jump off a cliff, but you are jumping off the cliff, and there are results to that action. That doesn't mean that you don't have the freedom to make that action, because there's no logical necessity that you should be able to pick what the results are of your action. You can pick whether or not you make the action. You can't pick the results of your action.
Yeah, that's already built in the system. Now you could make another aspect of that and go like, okay, so this terrorist group was saying, hey, I need to reject Christ or they're going to cut off my head. So now I'm going to take an action that is going to result in my death. Just like I took an action jumping off the cliff would also end in my death. And somebody could say, well, they both ended in death, so they're both bad actions. Well, no. We can see that there's a qualifier to that situation. It should be an easy qualifier to determine, right? So that's one thing that enters in. Again, that comes again to intention. I mean, a lot of things come to our intention, and what is the purpose of our action? The purpose of the schmuck that's jumping off the cliff is to say, well, his intention is like, he's thumbing his nose at reality and saying, I can make my own reality. Well, that's not a good intention. That's probably not going to work out for you.
Right.
Now, the other thing someone might say, well, okay, that's fine. You said that all. Well, can God, if some person jumps off a cliff, can God catch him in his hands and float him down to the ground? And I'd say, absolutely. And they'd say, aha. So God is arbitrary. It's like, no. He who created the laws of nature can suspend them. And the laws of nature, which he created, still exist. But he can supersede it. Because why? Because he's the builder. Oh, he put a window in the west side of that house. Well, guess what he can do? He can cover that window and put a window in the east side of the house. His will hasn't changed. The reality hasn't changed. He's still the builder, but as a builder, he can supersede.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
something, I've always found the objection to miracles silly. It's like, well, God couldn't do that. Like, what? What do you mean God couldn't do that? He's the one that made the rules. So, yeah, he can supersede them. I don't know what the difficulty is for people.
Well, do you think I think the difficulty would be in this, if we're honest with ourselves. We know why doesn't he do it more? That would be the real question. So if you're the skeptic and says that they already don't believe in God, so they're using just sophist tactics to attack your position, like well, you know, I don't believe in miracles because of blah blah blah. It's like, why don't we really dig down deep into your psyche of why you say or why you are lying that you don't necessarily believe in miracles? Your real question is, why don't they happen more often?
Which is a fair question.
Yeah. Or why doesn't everybody, but there's great answers for that. And it comes back to the same answers of why God didn't step in and stop Cain from killing Abel. It's a very similar answer, or in the similar textbook, is the same reason. And all of this results from what happened in the garden. All of the gravity existed in the garden. Gravity existed after the garden. But we're not talking about simply, we bring up the laws of nature and the laws of physics as a way to contrast, but the laws of sin and death, or the laws of righteousness, man made a choice, and that choice didn't change the laws of nature, but it did change the constitution of man, and in a sense that it darkened his intellect, separated himself. He basically separated himself from God spiritually, and not only that, he knowingly or unknowingly submitted to the ruler of this world. And so everything else flows from that. God still, because of the proto-evangelium, because of the promise God made to Adam and Eve about that someday there's going to come a seed, and someday there's going to come a woman who's going to turn this all around. But in the meantime, and until the end of time, what the first man and the first woman did is going to play out until the last day of this world.
Yep.
That's how permanent it is. And, so I don't forget, but coming back to typology, all through the scriptures, there are so many different figures that are types of Christ, or hidden foreshadowings of Christ. Seth being maybe one of the first foreshadowings, and then Noah, and then Shem, and then Abram, and then Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph, and then Moses, and then Elijah. All of these are kind of the reason they're all types of Christ is because they're all operating in his authority. But the closest type to Christ per scripture is Adam, because Jesus doesn't come to replace Moses. Jesus doesn't come to replace Noah. Jesus comes to replace Adam. And so.
All right. Well, we've been going for over an hour now, so I think now would be a good time to wrap up. What do you think?
Godspeed. How do you like that? I'm practicing. I'm not going to bring anything else up. I'm not going anywhere.
Wait, that was your outro, actually?
That was my outro. I was just tricking you that I wasn't going to go into the fact that marsupials have a great effect on the arid climate in southern Australia.
You really like talking about marsupials. It's just in my head.
I just think it'd be so easier than having a man purse would be to have a man pocket where, where you could put stuff inside your stomach to hold. But anyway, hey, where's my wallet? Oh yeah, it's in my stomach. Just reach in here, grab it. Okay. Well, anyway, hey, great conversation, Pinchy.
As always.
And you guys, thanks for listening, and have a Merry Christmas. Or I hope you had a Merry Christmas. And I'm sure you did. And as you know, Christmas is every day until he comes back again. So, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And Pinchy, love you.
You
Godspeed.
too. Bye. Have a good week.